thanks everybody who showed up and stayed around for this last day and for this last talk. I know I'm between you and getting home, so just a couple of things to start off. First, shout out to Couchbase. My marketing team said I should not eat this cupcake on the stage, even though I really want to because I'm hungry right now. So thank you, Couchbase, for the cupcake. I'm just going to put this here and try not to eat it while I'm talking. Also, of course, a big thank you to all of our sponsors. We couldn't do this without them, and of course, we couldn't do this without all of you. So, as I said, I'm Grant Ingersoll, a longtime Solr committer. I get the privilege or honor of being up here at the end and talking about the future, which of course has a very CTO kind of thing, view of it. And of course, we're going to talk about some vision today, but I also want to talk about some really practical things that I think are geared towards what all of us can do to contribute and make Solr better and how we at Lucidworks are doing those things. So first off, I'm going to start off with, just so you know, I've got a Venn diagram in this talk, so that means it's a technical talk. So if anybody doesn't want a technical talk, you can wait for it or leave at this point in time. I wanted to start off by setting the stage a little bit for how we approach Solr at Lucidworks. We often get questions from people of like, hey, what goes back in the community? What do you contribute? Well, how do you think about all this open source stuff? How do you make money, et cetera? Obviously, as a company, we have to do all of those things. And I think, in my mind anyways, as both CTO, Solr committer, as well as head of engineering, I like to think about it in a number of different ways, really built around kind of three cornerstones or three principles, and trying to then, as a company, build a synergy around those things. First and foremost, of course, is community. This is why all of you guys are here. One of the beauties of open source, of course, is that even though we can contribute, and the beauty of the Apache model of open source is that we as a company, of course, can go and I can assign a bunch of my engineers to work on Solr all day long. But if it weren't for all the rest of you doing that, it'd be a pretty lonely place. And so I think that's, kind of cornerstone number one of what we are trying to do. Naturally, we are a for-profit company, so yes, we need to have customers. I think one of the interesting things that we've seen as a company come out of the way we talk with our customers is the fact that there's not a lot of business around just break-fix kind of stuff for Solr. And I think that actually is a testament back to the first pillar there, the community. Solr just works, right? I mean, it just works, right? I can't tell you the number of times we have customers who are just like, hey, I didn't open any support tickets this year or whatever, right? Because it just works. We sometimes joke that, hey, maybe we need to introduce more bugs, right? Well, that's not a good thing, right? So what we've actually done as a company is switch to what we like to call a customer success model. And I think that goes well beyond just break fix and is all about what we try to do is bring our expertise and our great people, all the guys in the orange shirts you've seen here, the committers, our support team, et cetera, help you solve hard problems. Ask questions as you go, not just, hey, help us when we're in trouble, right? The old insurance policy model of support, I just don't think flies anymore in terms of building a business. Last but not least, yes, we do sell products. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This is not an ad for the product. In fact, I think one of the interesting things about our product now is that it actually frees up a lot more engineering resources for us to contribute to Solr, and I'll explain that in a minute. And so at Lucidworks, we try to build on all three of these three cornerstones or principles. The beauty of it is when all of these things come together like they do at events like this, you have this incredible magic that happens around people interacting, sharing ideas, collaborating to make Solr better, and then, of course, build out on top of all of that. So I think we all together rise up together, and it's that proverbial rising tide raises all ships. So with that, a little bit on product. You've heard us talk a little bit about Lucidworks Fusion over the past few days. I think this is really interesting in that what we've tried to do as a company is, if you've looked at our Lucidworks Search 2X product or previous versions from us, one of the things that we noticed and often heard back from our customers is that, hey, I've already got Solr running and it works great. Why would I put that 2x version in or something like that? And so what we said is let's go back to some founding core principles about what we are trying to do here at Lucidworks and the way we are built around open source. So first and foremost, one of the cornerstones of us building Lucidworks Fusion was we want to be able to talk to Solr as is. You can point Lucidworks Fusion at Solr. And in fact, the second part of that then is capture all of these signals, capture more data, just deploy more Solr, right? So in many ways, the reason why I said earlier I can actually deploy more resources on Solr is because the way we are building Fusion is all around how do I drive more data into Solr and how do I ask more questions of Solr. So for every new feature the Solr team adds in, that's something we potentially can then harvest in our product and all of that kind of stuff to ask higher order questions. And I'll talk later in the talk about what I think some of these higher order questions are that we are working on. The third part, of course, is that we live in a polyglot world of data in lots of different places, et cetera. And so we want to make sure we play well in the ecosystem around Hadoop and big data and lots of other places. And so those are kind of our three cornerstones of Lucidworks Fusion. I'm not going to make too much of a commercial here, other than I do want to announce the availability of Lucidworks 1.1. You can go to our website and download that right now. We heard from a lot of you, you want Windows support. I'm a Mac guy myself, but we know Windows is important, and so we added that. Bullet number 2 here is something I'm really excited about because I think this signal stuff is really kind of the cornerstone of next generation relevance, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. We've added a ton of new signals capabilities, the ability to do co-occurrence calculations, for instance, so you can start to ask questions like people who search for this, search for that, related searches, related products, related clicks, all of that stuff driven out of asking questions of Solr. Right, so all of your data is in Solr. Deploy more Solr. You already know how to do that stuff. We already know Solr works. Just start asking more interesting questions of it. And we've got a whole bunch of other stuff here, like you can edit schema, you can edit all of your Zookeeper files, et cetera, when you're in Solr Cloud mode. We've added Search UI. We've added a bunch of new relevancy tools to get started faster, and a bunch of new connectors. Just to highlight some of those connectors, we now, I think, have 30 plus connectors. Google Drive, Jive, Couchbase are some of the newest ones there. We've also significantly upgraded our SharePoint crawlers to be based off of what we call our ANDA crawler. If you're not familiar with ANDA, it's a Spanish word for like walk or crawl or run. And so if you haven't tried out those crawlers, I would encourage you to do that. So enough of the ad, if you will. Happy to answer questions about that afterwards. Let's get into the meat of talking about some of these keys to Solr's future. And of course, if you were in Dublin, actually, how many people were in Dublin last year? Actually, a pretty good show of hands. I gave this same titled talk in Dublin last year, and so what kind of guy would I be if I stood up here and just talked about the future? And I talked about the future last time, so I'm going to do a little quick recap on that one and just update you on where we're at with the future, because we are now in the future relative to Dublin, right? So kind of just running through these real quickly. Some of the things I highlighted, number 1 at the time was multi-tenancy. Right? Or this is number 10, sorry. I think based off of this morning's keynote, you now understand why I put multi-tenancy as one of my items on this list. We were investing very heavily in the time in making sure that Solr and Solr Cloud worked really well in those high-scale multi-tenant environments. I think, like I said, given who was standing up on this stage earlier today, I think we've done a really good job at that. But there's still actually some work to be done there around dealing with things like denial of service attacks, or what I like to call loud neighbors, making sure that tenants can be moved around efficiently and effectively. And I also talked about some other kind of key things there, like looking at shadow indexes, this idea that you actually have multiple versions of the same data in index, and then depending on things like load and all of that, you can turn on or off and get different quality results based off of whether you're under a lot of load or not. So there's been a lot of massive improvements in there. I'd encourage you to take a look at all the work and kind of digest what Shaolin and Jessica talked about this morning. Number 9 was index analytics and machine learning. The index analysis stuff has been led up by Chris Hofstetter. He's been doing a lot of great work around bringing in analytics. The folks at Bloomberg and others have also been contributing. I think one of the key things that you're seeing people do these days out of a search index is ask harder questions beyond just get those keywords and matches. They want to analyze the results, and often one of the best places to do that is before you stream them back out of Solr. And so the more ranking and understanding and analysis that you can do in index, the better off you're going to be. The machine learning side, we haven't done a lot there yet, to be honest. I think there's a lot more that we can do, and I'll get to that, some of that later on about how I think some of the engineering efforts that we need to make can help facilitate that. That's not to say that we should be doing all kinds of machine learning in Solr, but I think there are some wins to be had there. Number 7 was ease of use. I think there's been huge strides here, led by Lucidworks as well as many other people. You can simply now go and download Solr and do bin/Solr, start, stop, all of that kind of stuff. So starting with things like scripts to get started, I can't tell you the number of people said, hey, I didn't know, I don't live in the Java container world, so I didn't know how to get started on Solr. Right? They don't do Jetty or Tomcat or whatever it is. So that's one of the things we wanted to address, is just be able to download, get started. It starts with those scripts, but then we've also invested a lot around, ease of use and tutorials and getting data in. And I'm not just talking about JSON, I'm talking about data in its raw formats. Why, taking in things like CSV or PDFs, et cetera, just throwing them at Solr and have it do the right thing out of the box, right? A lot of good strides there, and of course still a lot of places where we can improve. You can always make things easier, right? I think that's one of the things we want to continue to work on. Number 7, time. We've been seeing a lot of people doing log searches, etc. That's of course a time series type operation. I think that we've all seen the use cases for things like Banana, Kibana, Logstash, et cetera, with Solr. But I think there's actually a lot more interesting things we can do here around time. The Trulia talk, I believe earlier this morning, where they talked about actually doing things like anomaly detection and all of that kind of stuff. You can start to drive more interesting questions on that. I think it's also really interesting to think about how we can leverage helping people understand what's in the index at particular points in time, so that you can know whether somebody had knowledge or not, or you can see what trends happen over time. You can see how your data's changed over time. On number 6, modularization. This is all about, I think, making it easier for people to contribute to Solr by allowing them to focus on specific areas of Solr and then just kind of plugging them together like Legos. To be honest here, I don't think we've made as much progress as I would like, but I think it's because there's actually quite a bit of refactoring that would have to go on here. That being said, there are strides being made here around support for better plugins and loading plugins into the system and all of that. Scoring, I think if you were at my talk yesterday, this dovetails very nicely with the idea that this notion of relevance has changed a lot over the years, right? Again, it's not just all about TF-IDF. It's about margins, inventory, prices, the fact that you and I talked on email or Twitter, sharing on Twitter or Facebook or et cetera, right? So all of those things are now considered fair game as factors in scoring, and of course we need Solr to be able to do those things. I think we've gone a long ways here. The academics, for instance, are way happier with Lucene and Solr, that you can simply plug in scoring models like BM25 or language modeling or divergence from randomness and all of that kind of stuff. But I really still think there's some room to go here in terms of making it easier and easier for us to build out much more complex scoring models, things like learning to rank, and those kinds of things that are done at really high-end search engines. I hinted at Plugability a little bit. Actually, we've got some work underway on this right now. It's getting better. Solr is actually very pluggable or extensible, but I think the way we can deliver plugins could be made a lot easier, controlled through user interfaces, upload jars, have them installed across your cluster, all of those kinds of things, not needing to restart, etc. Along that line, we've been putting in a lot of effort on APIs, so I think we've actually made pretty good progress here as a community around APIs. And this is something I know our team is pushing really hard on towards the end of the year here, making sure that not only is all of your schema addressable programmatically, but all of your configurations, all of your synonyms files, et cetera, because that then allows you to build richer, more interactive applications that can dynamically react to your content and your users' needs. Last but not least, scale. I'd say this obviously isn't done, but I think we've done a really awesome job here. This, in many ways, has been the year of Solr Cloud. Again, as Jessica and Shaolin talked about, we're seeing Solr deployed in massive applications. If you talk to the Bloomberg guys, if you talk to Target, all these people who are doing really large-scale applications, they're relying on Solr Cloud. They're taking advantage of the shard-splitting capabilities. They're taking advantage of all the hashing functions and all of those things that we've been doing in this system. There, of course, are still more things that we can do here, but I think it's just really been amazing this past year how we're seeing people put hundreds of billions of documents into Solr, and they're still able to do sub-second search, faceting, sorting, and all of those kinds of things. And that's a real testament, I think, to the community-driven model of engineering, right? That is open source at Apache Software Foundation. Last but not least, my last one from last year, open development. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart from well before Lucidworks was even a twinkling in the eye of a few of us who started this company. Anybody who lives and breathes Apache, you realize that one of the key things that we talk about there is community over code. I think this notion of, open source obviously is really great, but I think one of the things that Apache really brings to the table is this notion of open development. Anybody can throw code up on GitHub these days. It's great that source code has been democratized that way, but I think it's even more powerful when you start to get a bunch of developers working together with Mindshare to decide where and how that code should evolve. And so obviously as a company, we're big supporters of this. We want to make sure that we're doing our part to contribute to that. But we also want to make sure that you guys understand that, it's not as scary as you think to contribute to Solr, right? Or to Lucene. This is something you can just do on your spare time. It's a great way to extend your career, or not extend your career, enhance your career. It's a great and easy way to just start putting up patches. And patches don't have to be some deep thing that, overhauls the scoring system of Solr. It could be documentation, it could be little bug fixes, it could be typos. All of those things are fair game. The thing for you to keep in mind as you start on this journey of contributing to open source is start small, pick little things, keep at them, be persistent, and write your tests. That's probably the biggest thing we see. That's probably the single biggest reason why patches do not get committed, or why a committer who has limited amount of time just says, oh, you know what, I'm not going to look at that one because it doesn't have tests. Right? That's the single biggest reason why they get passed over. It's not because we don't like you or any of those kinds of things. It's probably because it doesn't have good tests. Lucene and Solr have absolutely incredible test harness framework, or test framework built into them, randomization, all of these kinds of really cool things. Take advantage of that, not just in your contributions to Solr, but also in your applications as well. So that's kind of last year to now. Like I said, I think we did a pretty good job. Obviously at Lucid we've been contributing a lot, and I know all of you have been doing some amazing things as well. But so, we live in a world of what have you done for me lately, so let's talk about what's next. And like I said earlier, I really want to focus in on 3 different areas. The first being, or kind of a couple different areas. One is like a bunch of engineering problems that I think we need to do in Solr. I'll talk a little bit, kind of weave in throughout all of those what Lucidworks is investing in, and if we'll be doing that in an open way through the JIRA process at the Apache Software Foundation. And then I want to finish up and leave you with some thought pieces around really where is search going. You heard Will and Anish yesterday talk about open innovation and the future of search and all of those things. I want to give you some practical things that tie that in that I think are very achievable in the coming year and in the coming several years around how can we bring this whole notion of search and data access to another level. So with that, first and foremost, one of the things that we've been doing at Lucidworks and actually takes a whole community to do, I'm sure I can go out and spend a lot of marketing dollars on evangelism, and in fact, we can do things like contribute the brand new Solr website. Where's Fran Lukesh? Somewhere in here. One of our Lucidworks designers put this together, and then guys like Steve Rowe and Tim Potter and Eric Hatcher have been working really hard to get this contributed. And so you're saying, okay, well, great, we've got a new website at Solr. I think that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg around one of the things that's really near and dear to building out a community and providing for a strong future for Solr. And it's really about the evangelism of what Solr does, right? We no longer can just have just the technology pieces, because what happens is if you don't have people out evangelizing and telling their story about how you use Solr, then it starts to be like people go looking other places. And so of course you want to continue to win hearts and minds. And the best way you can do this, I think, it feeds off of that open development that I talked earlier. Bring your passion, bring your code, and check your ego and just start contributing to all of this. Along those lines, don't feel like you have to do everything in Lucene or Solr. One of the great things you can do is come, of course, and speak at this conference, contribute to this conference. But you can also go and talk to Aaliyah. Email us at meetups.com or at meetups@lucidworks.com. We are always looking for speakers. We will sponsor meetups all over the world. We'll buy the food and the beer and all of that kind of stuff. What we need, though, is people who can speak, right? Who want to share their stories. It's a great way for you as an engineer or an architect or a technical person to enhance your career. It's a great way to tell your story. It's a great way for you to hone your skills as an engineer. One of the things I really pride in our engineers at Lucidworks is they can not only code, but they can also communicate to people about why that code is important. And I would encourage all of you to go and do that as well. I know it's made a big difference in my career, and I'm sure it will have a similar impact for you. Along those lines of telling stories, we've set up this URL up on the wiki. One of the things we're doing is working with some of the committers in the community to start gathering use cases such that we can tell other people's stories. These will all be part of the Apache site. We want to start listing out use cases there. We are also heavily investing in docs and documentation for Solr that will all be part of the open source. So again, maybe you don't feel comfortable contributing as an engineer, but you've got some great ideas and tips and tricks on how to use Solr or how to make it better or where documentation could be cleaned up. We would love to have your contributions there. Please just go to the website. What we're trying to do is take the reference guide and make that be the official documentation that's shipped with every release. That's already the case. And then use the community edition wiki to really drive these stories around use cases and kind of user-generated content. So that's item number 2 on our list of 10. Next up, clients. How many Fortran programmers do we have out there? All right, we're writing a Fortran client, right? I think one of the things that Solr really needs to be better at here is contributing or supporting other languages. We live in a polyglot programming language just like we live in a polyglot database world, just like we live in a polyglot world, right? We need to bring these clients in-house and make them first-class citizens. Java's, the primary first-class citizen. HTTP is another one. But we also need to bring in support for things like Clojure and Ruby and Go and C and all of those kinds of things. Or Fortran, perhaps, if there's some Fortran programmers out there, right? That's actually my very first job, was writing Fortran code. I still am recovering from that. I definitely know how GoTo works in Fortran, right? One of the things we're doing here is, like I said, is I would like people to donate. I know I was talking with Matt Mitchell, who's written a really great Clojure client for Solr, takes advantage of Solr J and all of those things, so it can be really smart about adding documents in. Talking about getting that donated back to the community. One of the other things we're doing is, or we're going to be doing here in the very near future, is transforming what I think we call internally within Solr Java bin, which is the binary protocol that Solr uses to talk amongst itself, to what I would like to call Solr bin. I'm just announcing that right here. I'm making it up, why not? And the reason why I want to call it Solr bin is because what we're going to do is actually publish a C-based implementation of that, as well as a spec for that. And then we're going to go and be able to address all the C-based languages, and we'll be able to address all the Java-based languages. And by publishing a spec for that, then anybody can go and implement clients for that. Moreover, we can then start to bring those in-house, make sure they're compiled and tested and released just like all of the other stuff so that they stay in sync with the core of Solr. So if you've written a client for Solr, please consider donating it. And then of course we can also make sure all of those clients have first-class support for all of the operations. It shouldn't be the case that Java is the only first-class citizen when it comes to a Solr client. So please feel free to email me or the list, or just open up Jira issues that say, hey, here's, I don't know, let's pick a Concat client for Solr, and we'll do our best to get that in. Next up, integrations. This can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, I think, but one of the things I want to see us do with Solr is make sure it plays really nicely in the ecosystem that is the modern open source world, right? And so that means it's not just about code and integrating in with great tools like Drupal and Magento and all the other places that leverage Solr. It's also about making sure that our code and our documentation and the community is reaching out and interacting with those other communities to provide deeper integrations. I think there's also a lot of opportunities here such that when people download Solr, they can very easily run on cloud providers like Amazon and Rackspace and all of those kinds of things out of the box. They can add and remove and upgrade nodes. We can take care of integrating and take advantage of platforms as a service and infrastructure as a service and all of those kinds of things. I think we also need to do a better job as a community of maintaining packaging and package manager options for Solr, so things like Homebrew and Yum and apt-get and all of those kinds of things. And then we also need to make it easier such that Solr doesn't pollute the class space, the class path space, if you will, or doesn't plays nicely and can be isolated from a class loader, etc. And then last but not least, I think one of the most interesting integrations and a great way for you guys to tie back to that evangelism side of what I was talking about earlier is really to go out and volunteer to help out projects. Admittedly, I've been busy with a lot of things at Lucidworks, but one of the great things that happened the other day was I saw a tweet from a person who works at OpenGov. And it just so happened to be election day, and so I was feeling all patriotic. And he was saying, oh, well, I've got this tokenizer that doesn't work when we upgrade Solr. And so I said, hey, you know, I'm feeling patriotic today. I went and fixed it, right? Well, it's that kind of thing that I would encourage all of you to do. We don't all have to contribute directly to Lucene and Solr. You can contribute to your favorite project and say, hey, here's a Solr implementation that allows us to do X, Y, and Z. Another favorite one that I have out there, I think that is doing some really awesome things with Solr is a small little startup based in my, or not even startup, nonprofit based in my current hometown of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Any Chapel Hill people here? I know there's a few RTP. This little nonprofit is called WiderNet. The really cool thing they do with Solr is actually they take a whole bunch of Creative Commons, public domain data, they put it on hard drives, they put it on machines, and they ship that plus some access points all over Africa. And basically what's loaded on all those hard drives is all of this open data, all of this knowledge, right? And so they actually deliver the internet to 3 million plus people via Solr to Africa. I think that's pretty cool and pretty amazing. And we wouldn't be able to do that if it weren't possible to integrate in with all of these systems. And of course, there's all kinds of civic hacking and other open source that we can do and contribute to. Of course, on the enterprise side, we need to play better and do more things with security. And I think the story around security is pretty good out of the box right now. You've got support for SSL and certificates, and we can scale all of that stuff out. There's Kerberos in there, the work that we've done, the community has done around making sure we are secure in a Hadoop environment and other things like that. But I think we really need to go beyond here, because security isn't just about kind of those three key things of authentication, authorization, and encryption. Those are, of course, a big part of the security story, but they only address the running of the services. They don't necessarily address the data that is secured in or put into Solr. And so you start to think about bigger problems around data in search. And you kind of have this moment where you say, oh, well, aren't those security, restricting access and search, aren't they kind of the mutually opposing forces? And I would say they actually aren't. What we want to do is make sure we deliver the right data to the right people at the right time. And so adding things in like auditing support, adding in tools for helping with redaction or isolating down such that you can say, oh, this person can work at this, can see this part of the document or that part of the document. All of those things help make the data in Solr more secure. There's other simple things like how many people knew that if a smart attacker could go and look at your auto-suggest, so you could actually have all your data and documents secured, but if you build your auto-suggest dictionaries in the wrong way, that a smart person can actually sit there and mine the auto-suggest tool, never mind the fact that they can actually see any of the documents. They can start to piece together all of the terms that occur in all of your documents, and then they can start to ask questions of those terms and start to piece together a puzzle. It's those kind of harder problems that I think we need to address in the security domain. So that's the security side. I'm just going to let this one go. This is my marketing team thinking they're incredibly funny. Big hand to Fran there. Apparently, by the way, you can buy action figures of little data and big data too these days. Obviously, it's still all the rage. We've seen all the money invested in big data. Solr itself, as we talked about with Jessica and Bloomberg and all of those guys, we know Solr can scale to hundreds of billions of documents and lots of queries. But of course, like I said earlier, we don't live in this isolated little world by ourselves. And so we want to make sure we play nice in the big data environment. And so there's a number of things, of course, we can do there, like integrate in with Spark and Hive and Hadoop itself and all of these great tools. Of course, we take advantage of Zookeeper, so we already play pretty nicely in that arena. A couple of other things we've been doing at Lucidworks. Actually, just this morning, Tim Potter opened up a patch on Jira that adds Yarn support for Solr so that you can now deploy Solr in a Yarn environment. We also will, probably December, January, in our Hadoop editions that we are available free of charge on our website, we'll be adding Spark capabilities there so that you can read and write from Spark to Solr and back and forth and all of that kind of stuff. So you can start to use Spark to do more interesting things with your data in Solr. But really, I think what we need to think about in this context is how can we leverage this stuff to drive more interesting insight into the data, come up with better ranking algorithms, build classification models, et cetera, using big data techniques, and then make them easily available via Solr as part of the scoring capabilities. Along those lines, why should Hadoop have all the fun or Spark have all the fun? There's plenty of really good use cases where Solr could do interesting distributed computations that help you answer smarter questions, right? So why not have distributed compute support in Solr? You've seen some of this already with some of the distributed analytics work that's underway. We need to, I think, continue to extend this around adding fast, efficient mechanisms for working off of result sets at scale. And I think there's some really awesome things we can do there and some things that would really differentiate us actually from a lot of the other big data players in the sense that because we have this really awesome ranking function built into Solr and Lucene, like the whole genesis of what we do, you can now say, hey, go rank these items based off of my scoring and then drive distributed computation off of them, all right there on all the nodes, and then bring back just the results that you want to do. And you need distributed compute capabilities to do that. So I'd encourage you all to think about it if that's kind of your thing of working on distributed computation. I'm not necessarily saying we should do MapReduce, but we could do something along those lines. I think it's actually pretty easy to do in terms of just the core development side. Of course, it's much harder to do to make sure it's really working right and all of those kinds of things. Kind of my last slide before we get into the thought pieces, if you will. I really want us to focus in on not only quantity. You heard Jessica and Charlene and a bunch of people at this conference talk about the quantity side. And I think the engineering side of us all really tends to gravitate towards the quantity side. Things like queries per second or documents per second or number of shards or number of documents and all of those kinds of things. That's all really, really important. But I also think we need to think about ways that we can leverage data quality techniques to help people understand what is in their index and not necessarily have to have them say, hey, this is the thing I'm looking for, give it back to me, but instead say, hey, I've looked at all your data already and you've got 27 documents that are missing fields, or this field here, there's 300 documents that have fields where the length is outside of 3 standard deviations of all the other documents. Those are all really helpful tools for helping you understand where your data breaks down. So that's kind of the quality side. Of course, there's all kinds of academic approaches on quality as well, and measuring things like precision, recall. I would encourage you as engineers to think about those things early and often and think about how you can bake that into contributions in Solr. On the quantity side, yes, there are still a lot of good things. Charlene talked this morning about the Jepson testing we've been doing, dealing with things like network partitions or corrupt drives or corrupt computers or whole data centers going on, whole data centers going down. All of those things, I think, are stuff that we need to bake in more into Solr and get tests in place around those. The Solr Scale Toolkit that we've talked about earlier is definitely something that can help here. That's all free to use. But more importantly, I actually think that we as a community need to achieve some interesting goals here. You're starting to see people get upwards of 1 million writes per second. I think we need to make sure that we can address that kind of data load of 1 million writes per second. I think we can, we're in the ballpark now, and especially if you add a lot of nodes, you can get there. I'd also say, getting upwards of 500 billion, 1 trillion documents in Solr. The more transactional kind of data, the log data, being able to achieve that kind of size is definitely something you're going to see be more commonplace in the next few years. And really at the end of the day, also, just a lot more options around scoring and similarity. Things like learning to rank, machine learning integration, all of that kind of stuff. So those are all kind of the engineering aspects of what I think is some of the keys to Solr's future. And so I wanted to kind of step back actually and put up a slide of my favorite sport at this moment in time. I used to be a hockey player. I still like hockey a lot, but right now my passion is cycling. And I wanted to put up this slide because these are, one of the things I think you learn as a cyclist is that winning an event or a race or even just competing against yourself it's all about the hills, right? Hills are where the Tour de France is won. Hills are where all of these races are won. And if you think about it, the hills are the hardest part of any race. How many people like going up hills, running up hills, climbing hills, any of that kind of stuff? See, so shame on you, all of you who did not raise your hand, because hills are where the fun is, right? And oftentimes, it's all about these hard problems, right? I can remember actually very early on in my career, wasn't particularly happy at the job I was at. And so I started looking around, and one of the opportunities I had was to go do kind of some really rote HTML coding. And I just remember thinking to myself, well, that's not really a hard problem, right? And so one of the things I like to think about and make sure we as a company are trying to do and a community are trying to do is always work on hard problems. I think that's just awesome career advice. If you're not working on hard problems, chances are your job is going to be outsourced. So of course we need to continue to tackle these as a community, right? So with that in mind, I thought we would get into some of the interesting things that I think are hard problems. First, I hinted at time earlier on. I still think this is a really interesting, hard problem. We need to be able to do higher order time series type calculations on our data. And this isn't just about throwing a bunch of logs into our search engine and being able to draw pretty charts about spikes with that data and have humans look at that kind of stuff. That's all well and good, but let's face it, pretty much anybody these days can download Silk, or you can get Splunk, or you can get whatever other log analysis tool out there, and you can search your logs. And that's a great use case for search. But I really think this goes way beyond just searching your logs and thinking about time data, right? This really is all about how do we relate to our data and to each other over time, right? Because let's face it, who you were yesterday is not who you are today. Who your data was yesterday is not what your data was yesterday is not what your data is today, right? And one of the important things we all need to do, right, is learn from what we're doing. And the way you do that is look at how all of these things change over time, right? And that's a really hard problem, right, is how do things change? What's important that changed in the past year, the past 6 months, the past week, right? And that goes well, like I said, goes well beyond just looking at exceptions and stack traces and logs, right? And so what we need to be able to bring to the table here is the ability for the search engine to help people solve that problem. Because let's face it, as we get more and more data, it's going to become harder and harder for us to do that, right? So it's ever more important to understand what's important in your content, right? And so time and trends is a key cornerstone of our ability to react to that data. Next one, puzzles. There's a guy by the name of Jeff Jonas at IBM, and he gives this really great talk. I would encourage you to go search the interwebs for it, where he does this really cool experiment. It's actually kind of a cruel experiment or evil experiment, but it's really fun and interesting. What he does is he actually takes, unbeknownst to the participants in the experiment, he takes 4 puzzles, okay? 2 of them are exactly the same. The third one, he removes 90% of the content of that puzzle, and then the fourth one's just thrown in. And he does all of this beforehand, and then he's at a party, fun party, right? Puts down a big table and puts all of the puzzle pieces on the table. And what happens, right? People see a puzzle on a table, they start playing with the puzzle. And then he's sitting there, he's like the fly on the wall, and he's watching, and he's seeing the light bulbs go off. It's a really great talk. And what he says, he starts to make observations. 30 minutes in, there's duplicates in here. An hour and a half in, we're missing data. We're missing puzzle pieces, right? Oh, this puzzle is not that puzzle. Anybody know that problem, seen that problem? Every day, right? We've got noisy data every single day of our life. If you think about it, it's a search problem or a search engine problem. We can help solve this. Problems like record linkage. Is this person that person? Is that terrorist this terrorist? Is that bad guy this bad guy? Is it a good guy? Et cetera, right? All of those are puzzle problems. How can we leverage search such that as data's coming in, we can start to build up these more advanced structures that relate things? And then how can we query those things and take advantage of all of the smarts that we know we have in our system to put together the pieces of the puzzle? So again, I would encourage you to go check out Jeff's talk. It's even better live, but it's definitely worth watching on the video. The really cool thing that starts to come out of these puzzles is we can now start to infer knowledge, right? We can start to build up and leverage things like Freebase and Wikipedia and other sources of truth, if you will, depending on your version of the truth. And we can start to ask more complex questions, right? We can start to reason. If you think about this, this is stuff like Google does all the time. When you type in weather, it's not just looking up for all the keywords of weather, right? It's looking up, hey, this person wants the weather right now. Well, you know, what do I have to know? I have to know where the person is. I have to know what the current weather is. All of these kinds of things all require knowledge about, you know, current surroundings, context, personalization, the world we live in, etc. We need to make Solr, make it easier for people to bootstrap their knowledge about their application, their products, etc. Make that easier for you to answer those kinds of questions in knowledge, in Solr. So I would encourage you to think about that. Think about how you can contribute your knowledge to solving those problems. And I think then out of that comes what many people in the information retrieval field would view as the future of search. And that really is about how can I deliver answers. And oh, by the way, for all of you geeks out there who are counting, yes, this is the bonus item. I promised 10, this is number 11. As we like to do is under-promise, over-deliver, right? The key thing here, though, is think about how can we deliver answers out of Solr, not just 10 blue links. Because what do you have then? You actually have an open source based data access and awareness tool that is accessible to everyone and can deliver answers, not just 10 blue links. This is something I feel very passionate about. I've worked on a number of question answering systems out there. It is one of the single hardest things I've ever worked on. There's a lot of great techniques and approaches out there. It requires really good core search capabilities, and then it requires a lot of reasoning on top of those result sets to determine what are facts, what is the person asking for, et cetera, et cetera. Shameless self-plug, I do a really lightweight question answering example in my book, Taming Text. But more importantly, though, I think the key here is that what can we do in Solr to enable the ability to get answers? And if you think about that, you know, answers range, you know, span the spectrum of knowledge, right? Sometimes you just need that little bit that's the answer. Who is the president of the United States right now? That's a fact-based answer. But what if we could start to answer harder questions, right? I don't think we're going to solve this anytime soon. But if you think about what we're all trying to do in terms of building out this search capability, it's about getting people answers. And so with that, I'm going to leave that with your thoughts and encourage you to get on the app and provide feedback for us, provide insight, do all your voting, all of that kind of stuff. And I would like to thank you very much, and I hope to see you at our next conference or before. So thank you very much.